By now, I hope you've noticed that whenever there's a high-profile crime or violent incident or a shooting, something going viral, we try not to get out in front of the rest of the media. We don't try to tell you exactly what you should know, but until the facts come in, because facts are important in cases like this. And that's certainly true of the death of that street performer on the subway in New York. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about it. We had politicians saying that this was murder. And now we're learning more about what happened to Mr. Neely that day. In fact, we've got this video that shows the Marine, the Samaritan. Of course, by now you know that Jordan Neely, who was in the, being restrained in that hold, died after this incident, and the Marine who was restraining him, he now faces a grand jury on criminal charges of manslaughter and murder. So what really happened there? Let's bring in someone who researches these things on a regular basis. He's Rafael Mangual. He's the head of research for policing and public safety at Manhattan Institute. Also the author of Criminal Justice. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Help me out here, because I don't know if a crime was committed or not, but it seems like from all the testimony and all the eyewitnesses, this person was acting in an erratic and threatening way. And we do have a right to try to protect ourselves and each other, don't we?
We do. And the question, I think, is going to be whether or not the, a potential self-defense claim of justification can be overcome. Now, in New York, unlike in some other jurisdictions, the prosecution actually bears the burden of disproving self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt, as opposed to self-defense being an affirmative defense that a defendant bears the burden of proof on initially before it switches to the prosecution if they meet that initial burden. But that's really the big open question. And so that's going to turn on a couple of things. One, how much force was used and what kind of force was used? I mean, we see this restraint hold being applied in the video, but that doesn't tell us how hard, if at all, Mr. Penny, the Marine in that case, is squeezing. And it doesn't show us what happened beforehand to determine whether or not Mr. Penny's actions, as well as the actions of the other two men who assisted him in restraining Mr. Neely, were reasonable, right? What were their fears? What was Mr. Neely doing in the lead up to that? What did the 911 callers say? Right. I mean, what we do know is that at least 3 of the men on the train found it necessary or reasonable to restrain Mr. Neely. There does seem to be at least more than one 911 call made about Mr. Neely, which indicates some sense of fear or worry on the part of the riders who called. This is all what's going to come out during this grand jury investigation. And, we just have to sit back and wait for the facts to develop. What's unfortunate is that these cases get seized upon by the media to kind of convict individuals in the court of public opinion.
Well, and that leads us to what these politicians have done. They've accused this man of murder. They said that this person was unjustly cut down in his prime of life. They're celebrating him as a street performer, but I don't know, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I think that we're allowed to have some peace and quiet when we're riding on the subway, and we certainly don't need to be threatened in any way. And the fact of the matter is, anybody who's been in Manhattan recently, or any of the 5 boroughs, and ridden public transportation, they know that it's not the most pleasant experience. And there are a lot of people who probably shouldn't be there behaving in ways that they shouldn't behave. It seems like most of the intelligentsia in New York writing op-eds in the New York Times says, oh, if you feel threatened, that's your own white privilege talking. Just deal with it. Can't we do better than this?
Oh, I think we certainly can. And I think, what we're seeing here on the part of people who should know better is an attempt to distract from the systemic failure that Jordan Neely's death illustrates, one of many systemic failures of the same sort, right? I mean, Mr. Neely was clearly somebody who was not in his right mind. His family has made statements about the degree to which he suffered from severe mental illness. He was on a mental health organization's top 50 list. He had been in and out of facilities. His behavior had been escalating over time into increasingly violent encounters. In one case, I think he punched a 67-year-old woman in the face, breaking some bones in her face, right? So all accounts are that this was a man who was not able to function on his own, and yet the system continued to spit him back out and put him in situations that were dangerous, not just for the people that he assaulted, but also for him in the end.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the media would just, are doing everything they can to distract from the fact that the utopia that they have envisioned is simply not possible.
Well, and this is a story that can be repeated in almost every major urban center in this country, sadly. We keep saying the system failed, the system failed. Well, we're the system, we're the voters, and we put people in place to set up these infrastructures to be able to help people. If somebody's been arrested 40 times, if they're showing obvious signs of mental illness or drug addiction, right now it seems as though they're free to be a menace on our public streets or in our public transportation vehicles, or they're free to live on the street in a tent if you're in California or if you're in Washington, D.C. and New York. Do we not have that infrastructure left anymore, or have we swung the pendulum over to the side of liberty and rights, that these individuals have a right to be mentally ill on our public streets?
Yeah, that infrastructure has been severely eroded over the last several decades. I mean, really starting in the 1970s with the anti-institutionalization movement. And in New York specifically, the
And by the
state
way,
has
I
been
want to be
cutting
clear,
beds.
because sometimes this is falsely labeled of conservatives taking money out of the system. This was activists on behalf of the mentally ill who were trying to get them out of institutions, saying they were being instituted against their will, right? It wasn't people trying to save money.
That's right. That's right. And there were a lot of, abuses within some of those facilities that, certainly should have gotten a lot of public attention. The question is what do you do about those inefficiencies and inequities? Do you tear the whole system down, or do you make improvements and, reform it at the margins? And I think we're starting to see, what the results are when we go with the former and not the latter.
Yeah.
The reality is that New York State has been cutting beds in mental health facilities, and that has left a subpopulation of people on the street who cannot fend for themselves. They need to be compelled into treatment, and we don't seem to have the stomach to do that.
I was living in New York when Rudy Giuliani was running against David Dinkins, and he sort of championed this whole broken windows method, which is the panhandlers. And by the way, street performers, subway car performers, they're panhandlers. They may sing a song and do a dance, but then they walk around and they get in your face and they want money. Going against panhandlers, the squeegee guys, people living on the streets, graffiti. Rudy Giuliani said, as mayor of New York, we go after these crimes and it sends a message to the society as a whole. Is he right? Is that what's gone wrong here? Is that they've sort of let this go back to where it was pre-Giuliani?
Well, I think that's part of it. But the other thing that we really learned through broken windows enforcement was that there is a wide range of offending that individuals engage in. And so by going after some of the small things, you will actually catch people for more serious kinds of criminal conduct, right? I mean, you arrest a fare jumper and it turns out he's got an open warrant, or maybe he's carrying an illegal firearm. And now you have prevented a much more serious offense by going after the smaller things. And eventually what you do is you incapacitate the bad actors that you identify through these things, and you get people the help that they need.
I know you're at Manhattan Institute and your job is to solve complex issues, and I keep hearing this as a complex issue, but is it? I mean, it sounds like you arrest the criminals and you put them away when they're convicted, and that helps solve the problem. I mean, it kind of is that simple, isn't it?
At least to some degree, yeah. I mean, we do know that the incapacitation of violent actors was responsible for a significant chunk of the crime decline.
Yeah.
Combined with the investment in policing and more modern tactics using data to inform resource deployment, that was responsible for another big chunk.
There you go.
And then the rest of it is kind of self-reinforcing. If you get the public safety thing right, everything else falls into place.
Well, listen, I don't want to mess up your gig at Manhattan Institute, so your secret is safe with me. It's very complex. It's very complex. Thanks for joining us. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight.